My father stood in court, his voice sharp enough to cut skin. He laughed as he told the judge I had wasted my life, that I had never held a real job. The words burned through me, while strangers chuckled in the back row. I didn't speak. I just held my breath, because I knew one day they would learn who Ophelia Townsend really was. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the Buncombe County courtroom, a steady drone that seemed to grow louder with every second I sat there. I pressed my palms together so tightly my knuckles ached, eyes fixed on the worn planks beneath my shoes. Those floors had carried the weight of generations, farmers, shopkeepers, neighbors, all the people whose whispers now circled around me. Richard Townsend strode toward the witness stand as though the space belonged to him alone. He tugged at his tie, squared his shoulders, and scanned the room with that familiar swagger, the kind that turned even silence into his stage. His voice carried effortlessly, booming to the farthest benches. "She wasted her life, never held a real job." The words landed like a slap. A ripple of laughter broke out behind me, low at first, then spreading through the pews until it echoed like an inside joke I wasn't in on. I kept my eyes down, the floorboards blurring as my pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't rise to defend myself. I didn't flinch or cry. I simply swallowed hard and drew in air the way I'd trained myself to do. Slow, measured, enough to keep my chest from caving in. They thought they knew who I was. To them, I was the story he told, the caricature he painted, loud enough for the whole town to believe. But the truth was sitting with me in silence, locked away for years. And though none of them could see it yet, I knew the day was coming when every smirk in that courtroom would vanish, and the man sneering from the stand would finally choke on his own words. 2 weeks earlier, on a heavy August morning in Asheville, a yellow envelope lay in my mailbox. The bold black letters cut like ice. Probate hearing notice. The petitioner, Richard Townsend. My father wanted the house sold. The house my mother left behind. The place where I had grown up, where the old piano still lived in memory, if not in sound. I sat on the porch steps with the envelope pressed flat against my palm, watching brittle leaves spin to the ground, even though summer hadn't fully surrendered yet. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It carried the echo of my mother's alto voice in the church choir, the sound that had steadied me through childhood. My grip tightened until the paper bent, a chill racing the length of my spine. I went to see Nina Carter, the town's attorney whose office perched above a laundromat. The air smelled of strong coffee and dust, papers stacked in careful rows, neon tabs bright against worn manila files. She leaned back in her chair, listened, then exhaled through her nose. "We don't need speeches," she said. "We need records. Can you prove you helped keep that house?" I searched through boxes at home until I found it. My mother's notebook, its pages browned with age. On one page, her hand was shaky but certain. "Mortgage covered. Don't tell Richard." The words struck harder than any gavel. She hadn't just known. I realized she had deliberately kept my father in the dark. My chest tightened. She had hidden it to protect me. And in that moment, I understood. She had always been on my side. Back in my apartment, I crouched beside the old cabinet and slid open the false bottom I'd built years ago with tools from a base workshop. My fingers brushed a sealed envelope embossed with the raised trident. No one had ever seen it. I unfolded the letter inside. It was plain, clinical, stamped by the Department of Defense. Verification that I had served with the SEALs for 10 years, deployed on classified missions, my record sealed under statute. I wasn't just the woman people thought taught kids piano for pocket change. I had lived in the shadows, carrying out work so dangerous even my family couldn't be told. A memory cut through the silence. My mother at the kitchen table late one night, feet tucked beneath her robe, eyes clouded with worry. "You're gone too much. Ophelia," she'd whispered. "Is there something I should know?" I held her hand and answered, quiet as a prayer. "If you knew, you could be in danger. Please, don't ask me again." She had squeezed my wrist and nodded. From then on, she never raised the question. Nina's voice pulled me back when I showed her the letter. "We'll file a request for in-camera review," she said. "The judge can examine it privately, away from the record, but you need to be ready. Once the truth steps into daylight, you can't control where it spreads." I nodded, the weight heavy in my chest. I had never feared a battlefield, but the thought of exposing myself here, of standing unmasked in front of the people who thought they already knew me, that was the kind of fear I wasn't sure I could breathe through. Saturday morning, sunlight spilled over the Blue Ridge Mountains, turning the stalls into bright patches of color. I stacked bags of vegetables and set out a few loaves of bread, hoping to make it through without drawing notice. But then my father appeared, his plaid shirt straining at the buttons, belly pressing against the belt, as if it were another prop in his performance. He raised his voice the moment he spotted familiar faces. "Cole just locked down a real estate deal. Real work. Real money." Heads turned, nods followed. Then his eyes slid toward me, narrowing with that familiar gleam of scorn. "And Ophelia? She's still tinkering with little kids at the piano, just for fun." The laughter broke like a ripple down the row. Not loud, but sharp enough to sting. My throat tightened, and I clutched the strap of my canvas bag until the seams dug into my palm. Through the blur of faces, I caught sight of Gerald, the old veteran who rarely said much. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me with a long, steady gaze before giving the slightest nod, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. When the market thinned, I packed up, sliding my hand into my bag. I found a folded scrap of paper that hadn't been there before. In rushed handwriting, it read, "Don't drag the family into court, or you'll regret it." The letters bled into each other, angry and careless. My stomach dropped. Someone didn't just want me quiet. They wanted me gone from the fight before it even began. The county courthouse smelled of old varnish, the air brittle beneath harsh fluorescent lights. I sat beside Nina, my fingers resting on the folder we had prepared. David Quinn, my father's attorney, rose with a practiced smile. His voice was smooth, sharp beneath the surface. "Your Honor, the respondent has no stable employment, no demonstrable income. The property has been maintained entirely by Mr. Townsend at his own expense." A low murmur rippled through the benches. I breathed slow, counting in 4, out 6. Nina didn't flinch. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were the allotment records, direct transfers from the Department of Defense to the mortgage. The judge flipped through them. For a moment his eyes sparked. Then he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. My father's jaw tightened, color draining from his face as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Quinn tried to recover, his tone defensive now. "These could be anything, ambiguous payments. They don't prove meaningful contribution." The judge said nothing, but clipped a paper to mark the page. It was small, almost casual, but I felt the shift like a change in current. The tide had turned, even if no one wanted to admit it. That night, back home, memory returned unbidden. I was a child again, sitting near the piano as my mother's hands trembled over the keys. "Ophelia," she whispered, "is someone holding you back?" I shook my head, forcing calm. "No, but there are things I can't tell you. If I did, it could put you in danger." She pressed her lips together, sorrow in her eyes, but never asked again. The promise I made her in that moment still chained me. And now, with the courtroom closing in, I felt its weight pressing harder than ever, forcing me to choose between silence and survival, or the truth that could unravel everything. The heat clung to my skin as I pushed through the courthouse doors, the day already bleeding into evening. The parking lot was nearly empty, a handful of dented sedans sitting under yellow lamps that buzzed against the still air. I had just gripped the handle of my car door when a shadow peeled away from the far side. My father stepped out, solid and immovable, his presence blocking the path like a wall. He planted one hand on the hood, the other curling into a fist at his side. His voice scraped low, hard enough to cut. "You're dragging your mother's name through the mud for a house that's falling apart. Walk away. Ophelia!" I stood still, slowing my breath into steady counts. In 4. Out 6. My pulse evened as his words slammed against me. In the glare of the overhead light, I caught the edge of a folded contract peeking from his shirt pocket, a company logo stamped bold across it. I didn't need to read it to understand. He and Cole had already gone to a realtor. They'd signed a preliminary deal, ready to sell the house the minute the ruling came down. His face drew closer, eyes burning. You don't have the strength to keep that place. Don't turn yourself into a bigger joke than you already are. I met his stare, calm but sharp. The only joke is a man who can't stand the truth. I slipped past him, slid into my seat, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he was still rooted under the sodium light, his shadow stretching long across the cracked asphalt. The courtroom swelled with people pressed shoulder to shoulder, the benches groaning as they shuffled closer to hear. I sat at counsel's table, Nina steady beside me, my hand resting on the folder that carried more weight than anyone realized. Richard adjusted the microphone with a flourish, leaning in as though he were preaching to a congregation. She's done nothing with her life. Dead weight. Useless. My son's a success. But she survives on luck and handouts. The low hum of laughter rippled again, rising and falling like a tide. I kept my eyes down, jaw clenched, forcing my focus on the rhythm of my breathing. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw Cole. His gaze slipped away, unable to meet mine. He knew his father's words were bloated lies, but he chose silence. On the other side, Aunt Nora clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened, her lips pressed into a trembling line. Then the room shifted. The judge removed his glasses, set them carefully on the bench, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The noise died at once. He looked up, his voice carrying the kind of authority that left no space for doubt. Mr. Townsend, this court has reviewed sealed documentation. Your daughter, Ophelia Townsend, served in the United States Navy SEALs for 10 years. That verification is confirmed. The air collapsed. Aunt Nora's bag thudded against the floor. David Quinn's pen dragged an ugly blot across the page before stopping cold. I sat unmoving, saying nothing, because there was nothing left for me to add. The truth, once spoken, carried farther than any defense I could have given. My father's face drained, his mouth working but silent, his bravado broken in front of everyone he had wanted to impress. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The walls, the benches, even the ceiling lights, all of it felt suspended in silence, waiting for the weight of words. The judge lowered the file to the desk, his eyes shining through the rim of his glasses with a clarity that pierced the room. Nina rose with unhurried grace, smoothing the papers before her. Her voice was even, deliberate, each syllable designed to cut through doubt. Your Honor, these are the Department of Defense mortgage allotments, transferred directly over the span of 10 years into the account covering the Townsend residence. Alongside them, a handwritten note by Margaret Townsend herself, confirming her daughter was the one making these contributions. The clerk carried the stack forward. The faint shuffle of paper echoed louder than footsteps. I kept still, my hands folded in my lap, the cool grain of the wooden bench pressing into my palms. My throat burned with everything I refused to say. The silence cracked when Richard lunged to his feet, his voice raw, almost ragged. I fixed the roof. I kept the lights on. I did the real work. His words boomed off the plaster walls, but they sounded desperate, stripped of the confidence he usually wore like armor. The judge lifted a hand. His tone was calm, but it held the force of a gavel all its own. Ordinary maintenance does not replace lawful financial contribution. The evidence before this court is clear. The murmurs swelled, then broke apart into silence again, a tide receding all at once. I drew a long breath, filling my lungs until my ribs ached, then let it out slowly. 10 years of secrecy, 10 years of carrying a hidden life, 10 years of listening to lies repeated until even I almost believed them, all of it laid down now, in full view of the town that had never really seen me. Richard's hands clenched at his sides, his face flushed, words trapped behind his teeth. He looked smaller, suddenly, as though the room itself had shrunk him. For years he'd told stories about me, as if I were a punchline. Now the story had shifted, not by my defense, not by a fight, but by facts on paper that couldn't be bent by his voice. I sat taller, but I didn't gloat. This wasn't triumph, it was release. The air pressed heavy with the realization that my silence had ended here, that the truth no longer lived in a drawer, in a hidden compartment, or in my chest alone. It had been spoken, stamped, recorded. As the judge's pen scratched across the order, I closed my eyes just long enough to feel the weight lifting, like a pack finally dropped after a long march. When I opened them, the courtroom looked the same, but for me, everything had changed. When the gavel struck and the hearing adjourned, I walked out beneath the courthouse columns. The afternoon sun spilled across the stone steps, sharp and golden, and the paper in my hand trembled, not from fear, but from the strange lightness that came when a burden finally slipped free. The crowd had gathered tight outside, faces I had known all my life pressed together in restless expectation. I stepped forward, my voice steady, carrying over the murmur of voices. My mother, Margaret Townsend, wanted this house to remain a place where music could live. Today, I'm establishing the Margaret Townsend Music Scholarship for students in this town who dream of singing the way she once did. Whispers swept through the crowd. Then a figure broke away. Gerald, the old veteran who had watched more than he ever spoke. He stood upright despite the weight of years, raised his hand, and gave me the crisp salute of a seal. A hush dropped like a stone. For a heartbeat, the world held still. And then the sound came. Applause, rolling and insistent. The same people who had once laughed, now clapping as though they had always known better. From the corner of my eye, I saw Richard push forward, his chest swelling. His hand shot toward the microphone. "I have something to say!" But before he could seize the moment, the judge appeared at the doorway, no robe, no pretense, just a warning tilt of his head. "Mr. Townsend, this is not the place for commentary. Don't make me use the word contempt." My father's hand faltered, then fell limp at his side. I didn't turn to look at him. I lifted the paper high, the words of the scholarship gleaming in the sun. "This," I said, "is what my mother wanted remembered." It was late, the kind of late when even the cicadas had gone quiet. I sat on my mother's porch, the yellow bulb casting its soft circle across the weathered boards. The wood had long since faded to gray, smoothed by years of footsteps, but under that light it looked alive again, almost golden. The familiar rattle of my father's old pickup broke the stillness. He pulled up slowly, as if unsure he should have come at all. The engine sputtered into silence, and then he stepped out, carrying a tin box scarred with rust and flecks of old paint. He climbed the steps, each one groaning, and set the box down on the railing between us. When he pried the lid open, the contents caught the glow, medals and ribbons from my grandfather's service in Vietnam, their colors dulled but still proud. The metal gleamed stubbornly against time, shining brighter than I expected. He didn't look at me. His words came quiet, almost fragile. "I won't call you useless again." I felt the air settle between us, heavy and charged. My reply was steady, unshaken. "I don't need you to be proud. I just need you not to lie about me." He gave the smallest nod, lifted the box back into his hands, and turned away. His shadow stretched long under the street lamp before folding into the cab of his truck. The door shut with a hollow thud, and then he was gone. I remained on the porch, standing under the steady hum of the light. Its glow spilled wide across the yard, claiming the night for itself. This house, this truth, and my mother's legacy were safe. For the first time in years, I inhaled deep, exhaled fully, and felt no weight pressing down, only the quiet mercy of a light left on.